attention, please? Please grab a drink and make your way to the rear of the room. We'll start our formal program. I'm Martha Holden, co-president of the Peabody Institute Library Foundation, along with my friend Stephanie Najjar, who's out here somewhere. I'd like to welcome you all tonight and thank you for coming out. We're all here to celebrate this beautiful treasure that we're so lucky to be stewards of in the city, and particularly in the library. And the library has done a tremendous job over the past 150 years protecting and restoring the treasures that exist throughout the library, but in particular tonight we're here to celebrate the Audubon prints, and I won't go on about them because other people who know much more will. So I would just like to start actually by thanking the sponsors, without whom we would never have a successful evening. Our Flamingo sponsors, Greyvock Associates, Kathy and Dave Gravel, and the Holden family. Snowy Owl sponsors, our library trustee Katrina Gravel and Dan Gravel, and Katrina Vasallo and Dan Vasallo, sorry. Our Blue Jay sponsors, Mary and Kurt Bellavance, Ledgewood Financial, McCarthy family, the Nossi and Merlin families, and the Rotary Club of Peabody. I'd like to thank our corporate donors for their in-kind support. These include Night Shift Brewing, and if you take a look at the logo on the beer can at the bar, I think you'll see how appropriate this particular sponsor is. Sweet Sally's Baking Company, and our caterer tonight, Plot du Jour. If you could give it up for Plot du Jour, they did a fantastic job. I'd like to thank the police officers on detail tonight. Captain Doug Marcus, Special Officer Rick Heath, and our security officer, B. McCarthy. I'd like to thank Library Director Kate Merlin, Assistant Director Al Hayden, Archivist Catherine Bedau for all of their wonderful work to make tonight possible, and for their stewardship of this great collection of art. And finally, elected officials. Thanks to all the elected officials who showed up tonight. Library Trustee Stephanie Najjar, Library Trustee Stephanie Dallaire, Trustee Peter Bacala, Trustee Don McAllister, Trustee Ruth Teitelbaum, Trustee Tom Paris, Trustee and Trustee Bartender Kate O'Brien, Library Trustee Ann Quinn, School Committee members Joe Amico and Beverly Griffin Dunn, Light Plant Commissioner Tracy Valetti, our State Representative Sally Cairns, thank you so much, Sally, for coming tonight, and our Mayor Ted Betancourt. Thank you all for your support. I'd like to bring the mayor up here for a few words of welcome. And if you would, please grab a flute. We're going to have a toast at the end of the mayor's welcome.
Okay, so I thought I'd let everybody take a moment to get their bubbly. But I'm Mayor Ted Betancourt, and I'm so happy to be here with all of you for our Birds and Bubbly night here at Peabody Institute Library. The library is a tremendous source of pride. There's so many wonderful things and wonderful contributions that the library does for our community, so many meaningful programs and offerings that matter so much to the people who live in our community. And another great source of pride is our Audubon prints. And to have an evening like this, and so thankful for all of your support and your presence here today to support and show our appreciation for those before us who preserved these Audubon prints and made them a part of our city's history, an important part of our city's history. And very grateful to have all of you here tonight. I'm very fortunate. There's so many people that give and care and really want to do the right thing for our city and see our city do well. And so many people, I look around the room today, and so many of you are a part of that. Without your support and contributions that each of you have made in different ways, we wouldn't have the special community that I really truly believe Peabody is. So thank you for all of that support over the years. I could certainly speak for a great deal about the work that takes place here. I'm so grateful for Kate and Allie and her team and the people that support it, our trustees, our foundation members, whose contributions, again, are so meaningful to what we do here. The library is an integral part of our city, and again, so grateful for all of you for your support. So I have the honor of making a toast. So I was asking a couple people what I should toast to, and it seems to be a toast to the birds is the very best thing to do. So, but thank you all. It's so important these evenings. It's great to see all of you, and let's do a toast to the birds. Thank you so much. Great. Thank you.
I just wanted to thank you for toasting to the birds with all of us. Just a couple names we missed. Also, thank you to ward councilors Julie Daigle and Peter McGinn for coming tonight as well. And thank you, Mayor, for your kind words and for toasting with us. So hi, good evening. My name is Kate Merlin. I am the director of the Peabody Institute Library. And I am so pleased to welcome you tonight and to share our almost 200-year-old first edition Audubon's Birds of America prints with you. Many of these prints haven't been on display or seen by the public in almost 50 years. And we and the foundation and trustees are thrilled to once again bring these prints back into the library and to the Peabody community. For a very brief history of the Birds of America prints, which our conservators will go into a little bit later, Audubon was a French naturalist who observed and painted over 400 species of birds in America, which he printed at his own expense in the 1820s and 1830s. Audubon observed these birds in the wild and then shot and killed the birds and stuffed them and posed them in his studio. He created life-size sketches and then watercolor images, which were then carved into large copper plates by a British engraver, which were then stamped onto 26 by 39-inch paper with a linen backing, and then they were hand-colored by women and children in Victorian London. And actually, if you look at we have some prints for you tonight that have been untreated, and you can see there, if you look around the edges, there's some fraying of the original linen backing that hasn't been taken off yet, and they are very heavy when they have not been separated from the backing yet. They're fascinating. So wealthy subscribers in the US and Europe subscribed to Audubon's prints, which were delivered 5 at a time every few months in a wooden shipping box. Most subscribers chose to bind their prints into larger folio books, each weighing over 90 pounds. Eliza Sutton of the Suttons, who lived actually across the street from the library, who also donated the funds to build the Sutton Room upstairs. And speaking of which, this is only half of the Audubons that we have on display today. There's 21 down here and another 19 on display up in the Sutton Room, so be sure to go upstairs. Eliza, who donated the funds to build the Sutton Room in honor of her teenage son who passed away, and also our front entrance and then the tower where the staircase is in 1868. She purchased this set of prints in London and donated them to the library in 1871. So we've had them for about 150 years now. We know that Eliza was not a subscriber herself, and we know that she purchased the full set of 435 prints in London, but we don't know who owned the prints before she did. We don't know who subscribed to them. We just know that she purchased them at some point. What we do know is that she donated them to our collection in 1871, and we have been their home ever since. And the world since then has changed, as has our view of Audubon himself. In case you haven't been aware of this, so the name Audubon has been much debated recently, as Audubon's legacy as an artist and naturalist is now being complicated by his legacy as a slaveholder in Kentucky and an outspoken anti-abolitionist. We can't really discuss these prints without acknowledging Audubon as an incredibly flawed individual, and in explaining away his slaveholdings and writings against abolition as just being a man of the time is not something that we in good conscience can do while we work as a library to support and empower all patrons and members of the Peabody community. I encourage you to visit the Audubon Society's website to learn more about Audubon's history and legacy, and to see how national and local chapters of the Audubon Society are grappling with his legacy while they all, including us, work towards a more inclusive future. So while we do acknowledge his legacy, both as a talented and groundbreaking naturalist and as a flawed individual, we also acknowledge the role that these prints, less as works of art and more as historical artifacts, have played in our history here at the Peabody Institute Library. Sorry. So through the 1980s, for over 100 years, the prints were on display, still bound as 4 90-pound volumes for library patrons to peruse. Current patrons and employees, and even people I've spoken with this evening, have memories of flipping through the volumes and examining these prints not that long ago. Two thefts in the 1970s, which are surprisingly exciting stories for next year's Birds and Bubbly event, I've also told a bunch of people this story, so it's not a mystery, but it's pretty exciting, caused the PIL to secure the prints in the vault behind me, which is another exciting story. So this vault that was built for our miniature of Queen Victoria, which was commissioned for George Peabody himself in 1868. And the prints were locked away, but not before somebody decided to affix a permanent EDS, Ebendale Sutton Library, Peabody stamp on all of them. So a lot of the prints, it's unbelievable. So a lot of the prints tonight, I think there's one, there's a really good one here on the Carolina parakeet right in the middle. It's great. And then one of my favorite pieces right here is an untreated one, but the stamp is actually smudged, so it's like they were doing it in a hurry. It's great. They did it in a place where it couldn't be cut off, and that was, I guess, the best way at the time to ensure that they would not be stolen. I beg to differ, but that's what they did. So a bunch of our prints were stolen, and then we, or really the FBI, recovered all but 3 of the prints. And those 3 prints still remain lost to these days. So we only have 432 of the 435 full set, which is annoying. So since then, the prints have resided in the vault behind me, which there's actually, so the Queen at the end of the night slides back in there and the doors close, and there's another entrance off the director's office in there. There's with a really complicated A through Z giant combination lock that's also 150 years old. So they live in there. And there's also 4 at a time on display up in the Sutton room, which you can see up there in a lock case. And then a court case in the late 1980s affirmed that the trustees are the permanent caretakers of the prints and are under legal obligation to conserve them on a regular schedule, which we have been doing since that time, hence this event this evening. So for over 20 years, the library has worked with Studio TKM Associates in Somerville, who have put hundreds of painstaking hours into conserving these prints and bringing them as close to their original glory as possible, and you'll hear more about this process in a few minutes. As you examine our prints this evening, both the untreated and treated images, clear signs that these prints have never been confined to a museum or even in frames exist. Until very recently, these prints were engaged with and examined and actively were parts of the lives of Peabody residents. If you look closely at most of these, there are small mold spots on some print, not active mold, but the spots are still there. There are repaired tears, there are water spots, and unmistakable discolorations on the upper and lower right-hand corners of every print. And if you view the untreated prints, you can easily make out fingerprints and smudges, as those corners are where people like you 100 years ago would have turned the pages. This print next to me is my current favorite. It's especially poignant as the untreated state means you can see that the color of the paper, it's very yellowed. And it also means that there are some mold spots that you can see. Again, it's inactive mold, but there are some mold spots that there you can see. You can also see at the top, the top strip was where another strip of linen was attached to actually bind it into the book, and you can see the holes as they were sewed together. And the best part is if you come closer, right here is the smudgy handprint of a child. And this child, my daughter is here tonight, and she's 5.5, and I held her hand up to it, and it's about the same size. So whatever child was, or whether it was 50 years ago, 150 years ago, it's easy to imagine a child, you know, up to their, like, touching their nose to it, so fascinated by the details and the eyes of these guys and the colors and the facial expressions, and also leaving their smudgy handprint. So it's just, it's kind of an amazing thing to realize that 50 years ago, 150 years ago, people were experiencing these just as we are this evening. So these prints are not just a priceless and rare collection of images, they are the Peabody Institute Library and the 170 years of patrons, young and old, who have sought us out for information, education, and recreation. The prints are a tangible symbol of the legacy that George Peabody and Eliza Sutton passed on to it. George Peabody's hoped that, quote, "Surely there may be one place, one retreat, free from contention and strife, where the irritated temper and fretted mind may find relief, where all, forgetting for a time their diverse opinions and conflicting views, may meet upon a common level." The current, past staff and patrons of the PIL, thank you for your support in preserving these pieces of history for generations to come, and for your support in all that we do to support the stories of all members of our community, no matter their age, beliefs, background, or language. The ongoing conservation of our Audubon prints means that we believe in the importance of our shared history here in Peabody, and that we're all invested in each other's futures. Thank you for joining us this evening. I truly hope that while viewing these prints, you feel the same sense of wonder that that small child felt, whether it was 50 years ago or 150 years ago. Thank you very much again for your support. And again, after we have our conservators for Studio TKM speak and give a presentation about their work with our prints, I invite you to get some more food and go to the bar again, obviously. View our prints down here, and I have to give a special shout out. Where's Catherine? You can't hide. Where is she? So this is Catherine Vidal. She is our local history librarian, and this really is her baby. Catherine was the one who chose the 40 prints that we have on display tonight. She chose them from there's about a 10-year span, 13-year span in which these prints were made. So she made sure that this represents from start to finish, from plate 1 to plate 432, that are on display, and even distribution of big ones and little ones and medium ones, and an even distribution of ones that are treated and untreated. And she's really the one to thank. And she also framed all 40 of them herself. So I told her she couldn't hide. So please give her a round of applause. And she's wearing a bright yellow dress and has green hair, so you can go talk to her later. So again, thank you very much for coming. This is an honor to welcome you on here, and to the birds. And if you want to go up and start talking.
Good evening, everybody. I don't want to prevent people from mingling and looking at the prints, so if you want to do that, feel free. And if you want to join in and see the slides, feel free to move forward. I am Deborah LaCamera from Studio TKM Associates. We are a small conservation studio located in Somerville, Massachusetts, dedicated to the conservation of works of art on paper. Each of the conservators in our studio is formerly trained at one of the 5 graduate programs in conservation in North America. I personally went to NYU, received my master's degree, and then went on to further training at Harvard University's Strauss Center for Conservation, and then the Museum of Fine Arts Boston before I joined the studio in Somerville. My business partner, Lorraine Bigrig, is here. She's operating the slides tonight. She and I took over the studio in 2016 and now are co-owners. One of the thrills of our studio is that every year we get to work on a group of prints from the Peabody Institute collection of the Birds of America. We conserve approximately 15 to 20 prints each year from the collection, and now we're in the process of making our way through the 4th volume of the 432 prints. Okay, you can forward. So as conservators and as art lovers, we're honored to be able to work so closely with these amazing prints. The accomplishment of producing this comprehensive guide to the birds of America has long been appreciated, but it's really only recently that all of the contributors to this huge project are being researched and acknowledged. Audubon liked to depict himself as a lone adventurer out in the wild, conquering the wild, and he did that in his depiction of the golden eagle. He placed himself in the lower left corner, struggling with nature with a bird specimen on his back. What we're really coming to understand now is that many people contributed to making this project successful. For example, he had 2 assistants working with him, one as a young man named Joseph Mason, who went on to be a successful artist in his own right, as well as George Lehman, who was an accomplished painter of landscapes and actually painted the backgrounds for pretty much all of the prints. In addition to these 2 gentlemen, 2 master printers were involved in the printing. W.H. Lazars of Scotland started the project, and then Robert Havell Jr. of London completed the majority of the project. Dozens and dozens of colorists were involved in applying the watercolor to the surface, and many of them are reported to have been women and children. The predecessors of Audubon should be credited very often with many of the scientific discoveries that formed the basis for his work. Audubon relied also very heavily on indigenous people. He relied on indigenous people to help him explore uncharted areas of the southern United States. He relied on them to identify birds within the areas and also collect specimens for them. And only now are they beginning to be understood. And finally, as Kate alluded to, he very much relied on enslaved people. Enslaved people contributed much to making his expeditions happen. And the extent of their sacrifices are only now beginning to be researched. And so over the many years of our involvement in this project, it's been our distinct pleasure to become intimately familiar with these prints and start to understand and learn much, much more about their very important history and all those who made this happen. So next slide. So in order to conserve this collection, it was crucial for us to understand, number one, the techniques used to to produce these prints, and number two, the state of preservation of the collection here at the Peabody Institute Library. In doing so, we were able to develop a conservation treatment plan that was best suited for each print. So I will just briefly give you an idea of the materials and techniques used to create the prints. As Kate also alluded to, Audubon had drawn from nature by J.J. Audubon printed at the bottom left corner of each print. But in fact, he did travel quite a bit, but the drawings were actually created within his studio. He had a system of wire and wooden armature that he would set up the individual specimen into lifelike poses, and then he would create very detailed color drawings of those specimens. So you can see on the left here is the specimen. In the middle is Audubon's drawing in watercolor medium, and then on the right is the print that was then translated from the drawing into printing for the publication. So thankfully, Audubon's widow sold his drawings collection, the complete collection of drawings, to the New York Historical Society. And so we actually have all the drawings and are able to compare side by side the drawings to the final production published printing plates. You can forward to next one. So in the 19th century, it was actually before the advent of photographic reproduction techniques. It was really quite a great technical feat to translate these drawings into prints. Audubon traveled to Europe in order to find the technical and financial support to create these prints. And the task was predominantly completed by the printmaker Robert Havell Jr. He employed what is called the intaglio printing processes in the creation of the plates. But his success in rendering these watercolors into a printed medium is credited with the introduction of aquatint, a technique used to create continuous tone, subtle shading, and depth. So to briefly explain this process, the image is created on a copper plate by coating the plate with the resin, and then the image is drawn by hand with a needle through the resin in reverse. So it's complicated. The copper plate is placed in an acid bath, and the acid is able to penetrate the plate as drawn. Aquatint tones were created by applying an acid-resist powder to the plate to modulate the acid etching process. So then, in addition, engraved lines and dry point lines would have been added as needed. So once the copper plate was complete and the image had been produced on it, the printer would then roll the plate with black ink and then wipe the surface of the plate, leaving the black ink only in those etched, recessed lines. And that's what you can see a printer on the left doing. The ink was then transferred from the plate to the paper by laying a damp sheet and felt on top of the copper plate, and they're dampening the sheet on the right, and then prepping it to go through the press at the bottom left. And then finally, the whole package was passed through an intaglio press, and the extreme pressure of the press then forces the paper into those recessed grooves of the plate, thereby transferring the black ink to the paper surface. And what you get is a black ink image on a white piece of paper. So Lorraine, can you switch to the next one? Okay, so how do we get from a white and black and white image to these fabulously colored prints? So coloring had to be done completely by hand. And this is really important to understand when you're coming up with a conservation treatment plan. So the coloring was added in an assembly line style, and where each colorist applied a single tone of watercolor to designated areas of the print. And then the print was passed along to the next colorist, and the next color was added. As many as 50 colorists may have worked on these prints to create a wide array of colors. Here are just 4 examples that give you a sense of how many colors needed to be applied. And the colors in particular in this very well-preserved collection are so vibrant you can really get a sense of the tones that they were using in their original watercolors. So the final aspect of the printmaking that I want to focus on before I talk about conservation is the selection of the paper. So it's extremely important. The artist and the printer selected large format paper known as double elephant folio, approximately 39 by 26 inches, in order to be able to render the birds in life size, even the biggest of the birds. And that's why you can see like the flamingo's head is turned down in order to render him in life size on these sheets of paper. They used J. Whatman paper as evidenced by the watermark, which you can see in the slide on upper left, with the paper in transmitted light. So James Whatman was a British paper maker. He used the highest quality of rag materials to create these large, robust, handmade sheets of paper. He invented a new paper screen and produced what's called wove paper, which was much smoother, much more regular on the surface than was previously available. And this new paper structure improved the quality of the printed work. The more robust surface allowed the artist to experiment with vigorous and expressive techniques. It allowed paint to be moved over the surface easily, enabling also multiple layers of color to be applied, wiped away, scratched, scraped, etc., without damaging the surface of the paper. So, if you can go to the next one, it's really crucial to understand the high quality of this and the excellent aging characteristics of the James Whatman paper, because in the assessment of the conservation of the condition of the Peabody Institute collection, the paper was telling a very different story. After 175 years of aging, many of the Peabody prints were exhibiting severe brown discoloration within the paper, as you can see in these images. Often the discoloration was spotty and mottled. And because we understand that the production techniques of James Whatman were so superior in quality, we could rule out this paper as the source of discoloration. And in fact, we could turn our focus to outside sources, and in particular, the materials that were used to bind the prints within the 4-volume format. So upon the, like Kate had said, upon completion of the 435 print subscription, Audubon had intended the subscriber to bind the collection into a 4-volume set. And as a result, each set has a unique binding. And while the book format aids in the preservation of the colors of the prints by protecting them from light, unfortunately, it seems to have created other problems in this case. In fact, we don't precisely understand the mechanism of deterioration that was happening in the Peabody prints, but what we believe is that there was an interaction happening between the adhesive used in the fabric lining of each of these prints prior, for the binding, and some chemical and biological agents within both the materials used as well as the environment. And these were activated in particular by very high periods of very high humidity within their storage. And as this happened, the discoloration progressed slowly over the 150 to 200 years. So in order to halt this deterioration and attempt to preserve these beautiful prints as best as possible, we had two main focuses. The first was to remove the source of deterioration, namely the lining adhesive, and two, stabilize the storage conditions as much as possible to prevent these periods of high humidity. And Kate alluded to the storage, and I will let her answer questions about storage if you have them later. And I'm going to talk specifically about how did we remove the linings. And Lorraine, you can switch to the next one. So when as each of these prints comes into our studio, we thoroughly examine and test for water sensitivity under the microscope. You can see Lorraine doing that in these photographs. We know that the black printing ink is oil-based and therefore stable to water, but the watercolor is not so certain, right? After all, it is a water-based medium. So fortunately, the gum binder within watercolor alters chemically with aging and becomes insoluble in water. So this process can take decades. And before we expose these prints to water, we need to be absolutely certain that that's the case. So each and every color is tested microscopically, slowly increasing the exposure to water until we're confident that the color will not change with treatment. Next one. The prints are surface cleaned before their water exposure using a variety of tools to remove surface dirt and grime that has accumulated over the years of handling. But we are, as Kate said, very careful to leave things like fingerprints intact so that, because these could become interesting. They could be those of the printer, they could be those of the colorists, and they might provide evidence for future research. And then the print is ready for the water bath. The level of exposure to water might vary from full immersion, as you can see on the left, or partial exposure, as I'm trying to show on the right. So using the surface tension of water, we can wet either just the margins or just the back of the print while leaving the image unimmersed. And this enables us to soften and remove the lining and backing and the source of discoloration while limiting or adjusting our exposure of the image itself to water. Next. So finally, for those prints that have very severe brown discoloration, we use a process of exposure to light to reduce that discoloration that is accumulated within the paper. So sunlight has been used by paper makers to whiten paper, essentially since its earliest manufacture. So while light exposure of a piece of dry paper will most often darken it, the opposite is true for wet paper. paper fibers, when wet, will be lightened by exposure to sunlight. And we use this principle to return the darkened paper to its original off-white, or closer to its original off-white tone. But we have to be very careful because light is detrimental to watercolor. In fact, it can cause very severe fading of the vibrant watercolor tones. And so here I'm showing you the Peabody Institute yellow bill cuckoo, who on the top, and then a different impression of the same image from a collection, a private collector who had displayed his print on the walls for many, many decades. And unfortunately, you can see after that extensive light exposure, the print on the bottom has lost most of its yellow and red tones. They've faded as a result of light. So we don't want this to happen, of course, with the Peabody Institute prints, so you can forward. So what we do is we use light impermeable foil masks to allow us to protect the watercolor throughout treatment. So here you can see our Victoria, our intern, conservation intern in training, and she is cutting foil masks precisely to the contours of the colored image. And that foil mask is then overlaid, as you see on the right, overlaid on the printed image. And we're able to expose then expose the paper to the artificial sunlight. And so the light is then able to whiten the wet paper and return it to its original off-white tone without affecting the beautifully colored image. So my final slides are just going to be a few side-by-side comparisons so you can see the extent of some of the discoloration of the Peabody Institute prints before they were treated, and then on the bottom after they were treated, and the extent of the brown staining. The next, you can do that. And here is the marsh wren, which is actually in the room over there. This is the extent of the discoloration, unfortunately, to this print prior to treatment, but it did treat very nicely, and it looks just stunning now. And then a couple more, a warbler, and then finally a snowbird. So I just want to say that it's important going forward that the prints be stored within very high quality paper folders and boards with good, stable climatic conditions to help prevent any future deterioration. Because the goal is really to preserve this special collection so that it can be enjoyed for so many generations to come. So I invite you to look around at the great selection that's on display of both treated and untreated works. And my colleague Lorraine and I will be around if anybody has any questions and would like to chat. So thank you so much and enjoy the exhibition.